What's up, guys? It's Cassie and Sara, and today we're talking about the Grimes sisters.
If you like murder mysteries, make sure you subscribe and keep on watching. On December 28th, 1956, Barbara and Patricia Grimes, who were 15 and 12 at the time, opted to view a screening of the Elvis Presley film Love Me Tender at a Brighton Park theater. Both girls were known to have been devoted fans of Presley, and this particular occasion was the 11th time they had viewed this particular film of Presleys. The sisters are known to have left their residence at approximately 7:30 p.m., having promised their mother they would be home before midnight. The Brighton Theater was located approximately 1.5 miles from the girls' McKinley Park home, and Barbara and Patricia are presumed to have had approximately $2.50 in their possession at the time they left their home, with Barbara having been instructed to keep 50 cents of this money in the zipper of her wallet should the girls opt to view the second screening of this film scheduled to be shown at the theater that evening. It is unknown how the sisters actually traveled to the Brighton Theater on this particular date, although they had invariably either walked or traveled by bus to their destination on previous occasions. A school friend of Patricia named Dorothy Weiner would later inform investigators she had been seated behind the girls with her own younger sister during the film. Although Weiner and her sister had left the theater at the intermission of the double feature screened at the Brighton Theater that night at approximately 9:30 p.m. As they had done so, Dorothy saw the Grimes sister queuing to purchase popcorn, and the two had seemed in good spirits. Both sisters stayed to view the second screening of Love Me Tender, meaning they would be expected to return home at approximately 11:45 p.m. When the girls had not arrived home by midnight, their mother, Loretta, sent their older sister, Teresa, who was 17 at the time, and brother Joey, who was 14, to wait by the bus stop located closest to the family home for their arrival. After 3 consecutive buses had driven by without either girl alighting at the designated stop, both siblings returned home. Loretta, by this stage, already unsuccessfully contacted the girls' friends in the hope her daughters may be at one of these addresses, and upon seeing the return of Teresa and Joey to the family home without their sisters, Loretta Grimes filed missing person reports on her daughters with the Chicago Police Department at 2:15 a.m. on December 29th.
They liked Elvis. They did like Elvis. They were young.
Yeah, I mean, so they're 15 and 12, and I guess it was safer back then.
Yeah, it was
so
definitely
they were
safer.
able to be out like
It's
later
still kind of
at
crazy
night.
though to hear
Yeah,
it.
because I know at 12, 15, my mom expected me to be in bed at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
So being outside like almost at midnight, like,
wouldn't have happened.
no.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting and would have made it very easy for someone to kidnap them.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
I mean, come
two
on.
impressionable girls out all hours of the night, yeah.
The disappearance of the Grimes sisters sparked one of the largest missing person cases in the history of Cook County. A citywide search for the girls was quickly initiated, to which hundreds of police officers were subsequently assigned full-time. Cook County officers were assigned by colleagues from surrounding suburbs, and a task force devoted solely to locating the sisters was formed, with the ground search initiated on December 29th, being bolstered by hundreds of local volunteers. Police conducted door-to-door canvassing throughout Brighton Park, and numerous canals and rivers were dredged. In addition, more than 15,000 flyers were distributed to local homes, and parishioners of the Sisters Church offered a $1,000 reward for information leading to their whereabouts. As a result of this coordinated investigation, 300,000 people would be questioned, with some 2,000 individuals subjected to serious interrogation pertaining to their potential culpability. Although the 2 arrests and charges brought against individuals who confessed to the crime subsequently collapsed. One individual, Edward Bedwell, asserted he had been coerced into giving a confession after being subjected to a prolonged interrogation. Despite police efforts and extensive media appeals producing many reported sightings of the girls, little in the way of hard evidence was yielded. Although several teenagers who had been at the Brighton Theater on December 28th did inform investigators they had seen the sisters conversing with, then entering a car driven by a young man whose physical appearance had been similar to that of Elvis Presley. The vehicle described by these eyewitnesses was consistently described as being a Mercury model. Although the sisters were front-page news by December 31st, their disappearance would only be seriously considered as a missing persons case by investigators after approximately 1 week had passed without family and friends receiving any form of contact from either girl. Nonetheless, extensive media appeals were conducted imploring both sisters to return home and for any eyewitnesses to contact police. Resultingly, numerous alleged sightings of the sisters would be reported to police as late as January 9th. And these reports often described one or both of the girls as having been seen in various business establishments. These sightings supported several investigators' initial theories the girls had opted to leave home of their own accord. Theories also abounded that the sisters may possibly have traveled to Nashville, Tennessee to see Presley in concert, or that they had simply left their home of their own volition as a means of emulating Presley's lifestyle. In the event her daughters had actually been kidnapped, Loretta Grimes publicly pleaded, "If someone is holding them, please let the girls call me," adding, "I'll forgive them from the bottom of my heart." On January 19, 1957, an official statement was issued from Presley's Graceland estate. This televised statement read, "If you are good Presley fans, you'll go home and ease your mother's worries." Presley is also known to have made a direct radio plea to the Grimes sisters, imploring the girls to return home to their mother.
The police didn't even, believe him. They're like, we'll put out a missing persons report,
yeah, because they
next
thought,
week.
Teenagers run away all the time, but they'll come back.
No.
No.
Are those people saying that they saw the girls go with someone who looks like Presley? That I can believe.
Yeah.
If these girls are such big fans and someone comes up to them and he looks remarkably like Presley,
yeah,
they're probably going to go with him because they assume it's him and he's driving the same car that Presley drives.
Yeah, because like we said, they're 15 and 12, very impressionable.
Yeah, and when we were younger, if someone came up to me when I was 12 looking like Harry Styles and was like, "Come with me," I'd be like, yes, sign me up. Even though, not a good idea.
No.
But then it was also 1956, so if they could go off by themselves, this stuff probably didn't happen that often.
On January 22nd, 1957, following a rapid thaw of recent snowfall, a construction worker named Leonard Prescott spotted that he later described as being these flesh-colored things behind a guardrail as he drove along a rural country road named German Church Road, approximately 200 feet east of County Line Road in unincorporated Willow Springs. Initially unsure of the origin of what he had seen and believing the forms may be mannequins, Prescott later returned to the site with his wife Marie, who fainted upon taking a closer look at what her husband had seen earlier. The forms were actually the nude, frozen bodies of the Grimes sisters, and the Prescotts immediately reported their findings to the Willow Springs Police Department. The girls' bodies lay upon a flat, horizontal section of snow-covered ground directly behind the guardrail, which extended just 10 feet before the incline of the embankment of Devil's Creek. Barbara laid on her left side, with her legs drawn slightly up toward her torso. Patricia laid on her back, with her body covering her sister's head, and her own head turned sharply to the right. It is believed the sisters had most likely been driven to this location in a car, with their bodies then being dragged or lifted out of the vehicle, then placed or thrown behind the guardrail. These wounds, resembling those typically inflicted by ice picks, were discovered upon Barbara's chest, and injuries resembling blunt force trauma were visible upon her face and head, whereas numerous injuries resembling bruises were also discovered upon Patricia's face and body. The girl's father, Joseph Grimes, had driven to the crime scene to formally identify both bodies. Following Joseph's initial positive identification of the bodies, over 160 police officers from several suburban Chicago police departments, assisted by numerous local volunteers, conducted a search of the crime scene with the additional assistance of the forest preserves. The search uncovered little or no real evidence linked to the crime, and the search itself would later be severely criticized due to those organizing the search allowing untrained individuals to trample over any evidence which may have been at the location. Well, I know this is something you hate, where you have people just touching
stuff.
touching stuff.
But I feel like they probably would have looked really beat up if they'd been just tossed over the guardrail. So, I don't know for sure. Or they were close to being dead, and then thrown over the rail, and then they died there. Because they were out in the wild in the cold.
And I don't know, but they've been found. The autopsies were performed the day following their discovery. They were performed by 3 experienced forensic pathologists who, following a 5-hour examination of each body, were unable to reach agreement on either a date or a cause of death. These experts did determine via an examination of the sisters' stomach contents, which contained the approximate proportions of the last known meals and subsequent snacks the sisters had eaten on the evening of December 28th, that both girls had most likely died within approximately 5 hours of the time they had last been seen alive at the Brighton Theater, thus affixing the most likely time of death in each instance to have been either the late evening of December 28th or the early morning of December 29th. The cause of death in each case was ruled as being a combination of shock and exposure, although each pathologist reached this conclusion via a process of eliminating other causes. In addition, these experts concluded that many of the wounds discovered upon the girls' bodies had most likely been inflicted by rodents, with the actual puncture wounds having most likely been inflicted after death. No obviously fatal wounds were discovered upon either girl's body, and toxicology reports revealed that neither girl had been drunk, drugged, or poisoned prior to her death. No items of the sisters' clothing were ever found, although their bodies were described by pathologists as being marked clean. The autopsies would also discover that Barbara had likely engaged in sexual intercourse, either consensually or unconsensually, around the time of her death, although no evidence of forcible molestation was found. The official death certificates of both Barbara and Patricia would list their cause of death as being murder, the specific means of which in both cases was listed as being secondary shock, resulting from exposure to low temperatures, which had reduced each girl's body temperature below the critical level compatible with life. One of the coroners who performed the autopsies, Walter McCarran, surmised the sisters' bodies had lain undiscovered behind the guardrail on German Church Road for many days before their eventual discovery, stating that the bodies' markedly preserved condition, given the time interval between their disappearance and discovery, had been due to the frigid temperatures in the weeks prior to January 22nd, adding that this had been due to recent snowfalls in the frigid climate. He also concluded the girls' bodies had lain undiscovered for more than 3 weeks because a layer of snow had blanketed the area on January 9th, and that this snowfall had rapidly melted in the days immediately prior to their discovery. Despite these official conclusions, the chief investigator for the Cook County Coroner's Office, Harry Gloss, disagreed with the official time of death, later stating to the media there had been numerous marks of violence on those girls' faces, strongly indicative of their being the recipients of violence as opposed to post-mortem rodent infestation. Gloss also contended that a thin layer of ice found encrusted upon the sisters' bodies indicated they had most likely been alive until at least January 7th, since only after that date would there have been sufficient snowfall to react with the girls' natural body heat in such a climate, and thus created a thin layer of ice discovered upon their new bodies in this location. Gloss contended this proved their bodies had been warm when they had been deposited beside German Church Road, since only after January 7th had there been sufficient snow to create such an ice layer upon and around their bodies. In addition to these facts, Gloss also stated that both girls had been subjected to sexual assaults throughout their period of captivity, adding that the autopsy conducted upon Patricia had discovered semen within the vaginal fluid swab from her body, and that curdled milk had also been found in Barbara's stomach, when she is not known to have drunk milk either at her home or at the cinema on the evening of December 28th.
I don't understand how, like, one set of autopsies they found, like, certain things, and then the next one this guy found all this other stuff. Like, the first time they're like, oh, we don't know how they died or when they died. But then this guy's like, no, I know. And he was, like, saying because of the way the snow fell and there's ice on their bodies, and that both of them were subjected to sexual assault. But how did they not find that, like, in the first one? Just, again, poor They just didn't do
forensic work.
I guess. Both of them were sexually assaulted. But they said the Barbaras, they don't know if it was consensual or not.
Yeah.
So my thought is, if this guy looks like Elvis Presley, she's the older one, and he's, like, putting the moves on her, she thinks it's Elvis. So she's more likely to
like, okay, Elvis wants me.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, that's my thought.
Graceland can be my new home.
I don't know.
We just have a bunch of questions on the autopsies. Yeah. The chief investigator of the Cook County Coroner's Office, Harry Gloss, strongly believed an official suspect in the case named Edward Bedwell had been the individual who had committed the sisters' murder. He asserted the wound marks noted upon the girls' bodies in their autopsies had neither been adequately investigated or considered. He would also further assert his opinion the wounding and assault marks had been evidence that the girls had been beaten prior to their murder, and in tandem with the evidence of sexual activity, were thus in line with the claims Bedwell provided to the investigators on January 1957 investigations. Despite Gloss's insistence that the pathologist had failed to report specific evidence, investigators connected to the case continued to insist that there had been no evidence of either girl being disreputable or the recipient of extreme violence or sexual molestation prior to her death.
So basically, Harry Gloss is calling them out and being like,
you guys suck.
Yeah.
You missed stuff.
That you should not have. Yeah. And that they were, like, beaten, basically, and that in the sexual assault stuff, they didn't, like, report correctly or whatever. So he's like, yo, like, what's happening?
You guys didn't report this, so now investigators are, like, going off of this and getting everything all wrong. Between the last confirmed sightings of the sisters at the Brighton Theater on December 28, 1956, and the subsequent discovery of their bodies 25 days later, several unconfirmed sightings of the sisters both in and outside Chicago were reported to the Chicago Police Department. Numerous people stated to investigators they had seen the girls boarding a Chicago Transit Authority bus on Archer Avenue heading east into the city after the screening. The sisters allegedly boarded this bus at Western Avenue approximately halfway between the theater and their home at approximately 11:05 p.m. Why the sisters would board the bus at Western Avenue is unknown. A security guard named Jack Franklin later informed investigators he had offered directions to two girls on the morning of December 29th, approximately 12 hours after they had left the theater. This verbal exchange had allegedly occurred near Lawrence and Central Park Avenues, and Franklin later concluded the girls had been the Grimes sisters, adding the sole reason he had recalled this conversation was that both girls had been both rude and abrupt to him. On December 30th at 5:40 a.m., the owner of the D&L restaurant at 1340 West Madison said he had seen both girls, with Patricia apparently too drunk or sick to walk without staggering, accompanied by official suspect Edward Bedwell. This location was over 5.5 miles from the Brighton Theater. A clerk at the Claremont Hotel, after viewing the bodies at a mortuary, likewise identified the sisters as having checked in to the hotel on this date.
Why would they go into Chicago and then just check into a hotel? And like the coroner said that there was no sign of either girl being drunk. But maybe, like, if Barbara was drunk early enough, and then when she was found, it was out of her system by then. So, I mean, I guess it's possible. But I just think it's, like, strange. Like, why were they out going around Chicago at 5:40 a.m.? Again, unless this Edward Bedwell looks like Elvis, and he was the one that had them out doing all this stuff,
whatever. We gotta
move
from this location to a new one.
Yeah, and they're like, oh, Elvis will go with you anywhere type of deal.
Oh, Elvis.
Oh, Elvis.
Edward Bedwell was a 21-year-old semi-literate drifter, and in the weeks preceding the Grimes sisters' murder, had occasionally earned money by working as a part-time dishwasher in a Chicago Skid Row restaurant. Bedwell was a tall individual who allegedly bore a strong resemblance to Elvis Presley. According to John and Minnie Duros, the owners of the restaurant where Bedwell had been employed, said he and another young male had been on the premises in the company of two girls who physically physically resembled the Grimes sisters in the early morning of December 30th. Bedwell was arrested thereafter and subjected to interrogation for 3 days. Initially, Bedwell was insistent that John and Minnie Duros and a patron named Renee Eccles, who had corroborated the Duroses' eyewitness statements, were mistaken in their identification of the girls he had been in the company of on December 30th. Although he was formally charged with the sisters' murders on January 27, 1957, having signed a 14-page confession in which he said he and a 28-year-old William Cole Willingham had indeed been in the company of the Grimes sisters on December 30th, having also retained their company until January 7th, typically drinking in various West Madison Street Skid Row saloons. According to Bedwell, after several days in the girls' willing company, shortly after he and his companion had fed the sisters hot dogs, they had extensively beaten both girls before throwing their new bodies into a snow-filled ditch when both girls had refused their sexual advances. Upon reading Bedwell's confession, Loretta Grimes was quoted as stating, "It's a lie. My girls wouldn't be on West Madison Street. They didn't even know where it was." Willingham admitted he had been in the company of Bedwell and 2 girls in the early hours of December 30th, but denied the girls had been the Grimes sisters. He also empathetically denied any involvement in the murders. Bedwell himself would later recant the confession he had provided to investigators, stating that he had only provided a confession after being held in custody for 4 days in the mistaken belief the police would subsequently release him if he did so. The autopsy reports upon both girls also supported Bedwell's recantation, as no alcohol or hot dogs were found in either victim's blood or digestive systems, nor had the girls been beaten to death. Bedwell is also known to have clocked in at Ajax Consolidated Company, his place of employment, from 4:19 p.m. on December 28, 1956 to 12:30 a.m. on December 29th, covering the actual time period of the sisters' most likely abduction, with further records confirming Bedwell had been working in Cicero on the date he said he had murdered them. On February 6, Bedwell was freed on a $20,000 bond paid for by an individual from Champaign.
So basically he confessed because he thought, oh, the police are going to release me if I do.
No, that's not how it works. It's not how it works. You confess, they're gonna charge you.
That's cuckoo. But I would say that this guy's probably the best suspect, just because he looks like Elvis.
Yeah.
And some witnesses said that they saw the girls leaving with someone who looks like that.
So.
But maybe they hung out with him still, but he's not the one that killed them.
He's still a fishy Why can't I say
suspect?
Why can't I say suspect? He's still a fishy suspect, though. Max Fleek was a 17-year-old suspect in the sisters' murders. Initially considered one of the prime suspects due to his age, he was protected by contemporary Illinois laws which prevented juveniles from subjection to polygraph tests. Nonetheless, Chicago Police Captain Ralph Petticky persuaded the teenager to submit to an unofficial polygraph test, which Fleek voluntarily undertook. In the course of this unofficial polygraph test, Fleek allegedly confessed to the murders. With no legal means of using his tests as evidence against him, police were forced to release him without charge. In addition, police were unable to charge Fleek with the murders due to there being a lack of physical evidence corroborating his unofficial polygraph confession that he had kidnapped and subsequently killed the sisters. He was later jailed for the unrelated murder of a young woman.
In this unofficial polygraph test, he confessed to the murders, but did it say that he actually did it? Like, did the polygraph test say that it was true? That's something they didn't say. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I know they couldn't use it because it was an unofficial one.
But maybe, like, they would describe things, and he was like, yeah, I did that. But he later went to jail for killing somebody else. So.
Why would you put it there? What's wrong with you? Let me squish my calf into this teeny tiny crevice.
I thought it would work. Walter Kranz, a 53-year-old steam fitter and self-proclaimed psychic, phoned a switchboard operator at Chicago Central Police Complaint Room on January 15th to inform the operator of his conviction that both sisters were deceased and that their bodies could be found in an unincorporated area of Lyons Township. Kranz refused to disclose his name to the operator in this phone call, simply stating that he had experienced this revelation in a dream, before terminating the call. Nonetheless, the operator was able to trace the call to a location close to his home. The park described by Kranz in his telephone call would prove to be approximately 1 mile from the true location, where the girls' bodies would be just found 1 week later. When questioned, Kranz informed police that several members of his family and ancestors possessed psychic powers, and that he had experienced this particular vision after a night of heavy drinking. Although initially considered by police to be their number one suspect in the murders, and with handwriting experts also determining he may have written a ransom note received by the girl's mother prior to the discovery of her daughter's bodies, Kranz denied any involvement in the sisters' abduction and murder. After being subjected to multiple interrogations, he was released.
I don't understand why he's their number one suspect.
Apparently all of them were their number one suspects.
So true. I mean, I get that they'd be like, oh, you're psychic, like,
you crazy bitch.
Not true. Like, you definitely knew where they were. But at the same time, like, they didn't find any evidence. They didn't see anyone with him. Why would these girls go off with a 50-year-old man? And that didn't look like Elvis.
In 2013, a retired West Chicago police officer named Raymond Johnson began a personal investigation into the case. Johnson, considered by many to be an expert on this case, had become interested in the Grimes sisters case in 2010 when he had been researching a book he had been writing about the city's history. Having extensively researched the case, Johnson has stated his conviction that the case is still a solvable one, but only with public assistance, and that he believes that the perpetrator of this crime had been a 23-year-old self-confessed child killer named Charles Leroy Melquist, who had been considered a suspect in the sisters' abduction and murder in 1957. Melquist had been convicted of the September 1958 murder of a 15-year-old girl named Bonnie Leigh Scott, whom he had known prior to her murder, and whose decapitated body had been found 2 months after her disappearance, less than 10 miles from where the Grimes sisters' bodies had been discovered. Following the discovery of Scott's body, investigators had noted similarities in this murder and body disposal and that of the Grimes sisters. Nonetheless, Melquist was never questioned as to his potential culpability in the Grimes sisters' murders, as his attorney had forbidden him to be subject to questioning. The day after the body of Bonnie Leigh Scott was discovered, Loretta Grimes received a phone call from an individual who, on this occasion, claimed responsibility for Scott's murder. On this occasion, the caller had stated, "I've committed another perfect crime. This is another one those cops won't solve, and they're not going to affix blame onto Bedwell or Barry Cook." Loretta Grimes would remain adamant until her death that this caller had been the same individual who had contacted her in May 1957 and had revealed the deformity upon one of her daughter's feet, which had never been released to the press or the public, stating, "I will never forget that voice." Charles Melquist was never charged with his alleged involvement in the deaths of the Grimes sisters. He died in 2010. The murder of the Grimes sisters had been described by authorities as a crime which shattered the innocence of Chicago. This case is also acknowledged as one of the most labor-intensive missing person and murder investigations in Cook County, and remains one of Chicago's most infamous cold cases.
I think it's him.
I think so too.
The mother of the Grimes sisters has been called by this guy like twice.
One like 1957 and like...
And how come this guy who started researching it in 2010, 2013, whatever, was like, oh, it's him. But the police back then couldn't be like, oh, it's probably him.
They couldn't question him or anything.
Why? That makes me so angry. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
I honestly have no words. Like, I don't even know what to say. Like,
how do you explain that? Like, how do you even pick that apart? Why would they just be like, eh. But their number one suspect was a 53-year-old man who claimed to be a psychic that had nothing to do with the crime. Makes perfect sense.
what makes me think he did do it is he knew that one of them had like a foot deformity.
Yeah, how would you know that? Yeah, so this story doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
It's still an
So who do you think done it?
Charles Milquest.
Yeah.
Milquest
I'd like to know what
did
he
it.
looked like.
Well, you're
Did
gonna
he
find
look
out.
You're right. Because I gotta do research.
She's gonna find the pictures.
But like, it's a tie between him or Bedwell.
Bedwell.
Because he looked like Elvis. That's pretty much my main thing for it. And he confessed for what reason?
What if, like, the girls went with Bedwell, but he didn't kill them?
And then this guy picked him up later.
This guy picked him up later.
Nailed it. Yeah, we hope you guys enjoyed this. Make sure that you leave a comment about what you think. Who done it?
Who's done it? Is it Bedwell? Is it Fleek? Is it Franz? Or is it Milquest? Like, turn on your post notifications. Follow our social medias down in the description below.
We will see you guys next Friday. Peace!